My name is Brian Nolan, and I'm here to teach you the fine art of weathering structures. Now, whether you think my stuff's fine art or not is another thing. I'm going to pass out
Not before you finish.
my tips.
Oh.
I said, hecklers sit in the back. I'm going to pass out a tips sheet that I'm going to be working from. Pass these out.
Same thing?
Yeah.
Grab it. Grab that because you're going to need them back.
Yeah. I've got them. You got enough? Joe, you're going to have to share.
Thank you.
There we have one, and you've got extras. The first thing I'm going to talk about is whether you're building a kit and it's a wood kit, whether you're working with clapboard siding or strip wood. The very first thing that I do with the kit when I open it is inspect the strip wood and make sure that it's good quality stuff. And like kind of inspect the grain and see which way you're going to go with it for wire brushing it, because I add texture to all my strip wood. I'll pass some of this out so you can look at it. But the very first thing I do is I give it a bath, a good wiping of alcohol and India ink. And what I use is 91% alcohol, if you can find it. Most of the alcohol that you see on the shelves in the grocery store is 70%. I'm sure you've seen that. And that means it has 30% water in it, which shrinks your grain once you add grain to your wood. But I don't add grain to my wood until I have stained it with the alcohol wash. And what I do is I take 2 teaspoons of Higgins brand India ink. I don't have any with me, I should have brought it. But Higgins is available in art supply stores or Michael's, if you have Michael's in your area, or the large craft chain stores. So you add 2 teaspoons of Higgins brand India ink to 1 pint of rubbing alcohol. 91% if you can get it, but 70%, I've used 70%, I think we all have. And, that'll be good enough. Now, once the wood is dry, once this is dry, I use poly-S colors. Are you all familiar with the poly scale? I use earth and some roof brown. Let me make sure, because I change back and forth. Let me see what I'm telling you is exactly what's right.
This mud and earth.
Mud and earth. I make up a wash of that in a small dish. I'll add a little bit of water, and I'll take a brush load of mud, a medium-sized round brush load of mud and a brush load of earth, and mix them into this water till it turns it the right color.
Not blue for sure.
Not blue.
You'll know.
But you'll know. It's just going to be an earthy color. And this is just the base coat that you're going to put on your wood after the ink dries. So now you wash all your boards with that. Let that dry. Now when that's completely dry, and it has to be completely dry, otherwise what you're going to do next will just feather up the wood and make it a mess. I take a wire brush, and I start with one of this style. You can get these in Home Depot or any paint store will have these. They're for cleaning parts or your rusty railings. And I'll take this wire brush and I'll run it to add grain. And depending on what scale you work in, whether you're working in HO, S, O, this will give you a good base light grain. And then often, I'll take some boards, and I'll take this really big heavy brush, and I'll just run this down and make some deep grooves in it. Okay? So now you've got your boards ready to lay up for your project. Now, this station here, I'm going to pass this model around, and it's pretty bulletproof, but still, you know how to handle these things. What I've done here is, when I want the deep grain in the boards to show, what I do, Bragdon Industries, is everybody familiar with the Bragdon weathering powders? If you're not, there's a website address for them in the handout. I take the soot color, which is this, it's the dark one, and I'll liberally dust this on the boards. And then I'll take mineral spirits, the odorless mineral spirits, and I'll wash that into the grain, and it'll settle in there. And then, after looking at it, sometimes I just take my finger, or you take a rag, and just gently wipe off the excess. You don't want to wipe it out of the grain, you want it to stay in there, because you want your grain ultimately to really be visible. And once that's dry, then I take some earth, some light gray, mud, and I start dry brushing these colors up. Are you all familiar with the dry brushing process? Because I explained it in here, but we'll go over that. But I dry brush these colors up until the boards start to lighten up, and that deep grain starts to show. You see that, Steve? We'll pass that around. And it's very visible on this station. I'll pass this around too. You can just hold it like this. It won't go anywhere. This will give you an idea of the colors on how they are once they're dry brushed up. I'm big on dry brushing colors up in stages. You start with a darker gray. I'll start with like this driftwood color. This is made by Americana. These are some of the things that you can buy in Michael's or Crafts and Stuff or whatever. One's a darker and one's a lighter. I'll start with the dark, and then on top of the dark, later on I'll dry brush with the darker. I'll even come in with some earth, maybe a little more mud, give it a little richness. Mud, go ahead.
Excuse me, is that acrylic?
Yeah, these are acrylics. I'll pass these around too so everyone can see it.
You do this before you start assembling?
A lot of times I do, but with the station, with this particular project, that station platform is actually O-scale ties. So to brush every one of those individually would be tough. So I glued them all down first and then came in with my brush and stained. I stained them on site. They weren't, done, individually. So that's how I start my wood project. And while I'm on that, I'm going to just bring up a real simple method. If you've never done board construction before, it's a real simple method for doing it. You can draw your wall section on a piece of graph paper. Real super simple. You can put a peak on your end walls and just draw it out the way you want. It's simple. These are 1/4-inch squares. Once you have your wall section cut out, put it on a piece of cardboard, which is going to be your wall, believe it or not, and smear the back of the graph paper with carpenter's wood glue. Just a real thin coat. You've got time to work on it with your finger. You can wet your finger a little bit. The paper will crinkle a tiny bit, but just, gently, because it's going to stick, you just roll it out. And once you have that, once that's dry, take a scissor and cut the darn thing out real quick. And then, if you want to do that's how this freight station was built. Of course, I beefed the walls up with big pieces of backing, Civil War, quarter inch square wood. But I just lay these on, and if you want to do, clapboard siding, you just overlap a couple inches. You can just use your eyeball. You don't have to. It's nothing fancy. That's not, and it goes fast. And when you're all done, measure where you want your window and cut your window out. Stick your window in, or build a window if you want. I built that window, but Grant Line makes windows. Other manufacturers make them and just pop them in. But that's a real quick method. Any questions on wood? I do the same process for clapboard siding.
Is there any significant difference between shoe leather dye and India ink?
Our friend John Addison uses shoe dye. I use ink. We were on a search one time for shoe dye up in North Carolina, and John was making up his solution. He likes that. I've been using the alcohol India ink for so long that that's what I do, and John, we all use our different methods, and we share techniques. So, but the shoe dye is good. I just happen to use the India ink instead because I've done it for so long. Any other questions on wood, on clapboard siding or aging wood? Is it kind of clear? Clear as mud? What I'm going to talk about next. Oh, before I go on, if you buy scribe sheeting, I do the same thing with the scribe sheeting. I use a brush on all the scribe sheeting, and I add my nail holes, and you figure if your studs were 16 on center or 24 inches on center, you can add nail holes by using a straight edge. Or some people prefer a pounce wheel, if you're familiar with that. I like to use a sharp, I have an old awl, I've had it for a century, that I use for making my nail holes, because I like to kind of stagger them. I don't like them always straight. So, and you make your board splits with the back end of an X-Acto knife. You just study the freight depot, wherever it is, and as you look at it, you can see how things are split and gouged and feathered and weathered. And the next thing, basic stone colors. Now on that station that's being passed around, I can pass these around too, because it shows a little piece of brick. The colors that I used on the station and on this wall section are 3 available colors, and I wanted to use 3 colors that would be available to everybody, and they're the Tester's Model Master paints. Okay. And I used, for the stones, I used this Model Master wood, just called wood. And the other one is flat gold gray, and the other one is military brown, just these 3 colors. And I just made thin washes of each of the 3 colors and just started randomly. Before I go on, that's a hydrocal casting. I don't seal my castings prior to staining. I prefer the way each stone is going to absorb the stain, and I like that look. I don't see the point in sealing them. If that were the case, I'd just buy a urethane kit and do that. So, but anyway, I make little thin washes and dab them on each individual stone and kind of look at them and add, and I let them even overlap into each other here and there. And then when I'm all done with that, I let it dry real good, and then I make up a thin wash of polyS or polyscale now of tarnished black. Mix that into a real thin wash, and I'll spray the casting with a little bit of water just to dampen it, and I'll take my brush, which I use a small pointed brush, and I'll dip it in the tarnished black, and I'll just touch it to a stone joint. And it'll draw, when you touch it to the stone joint, it'll draw right off the brush and it'll capillary in.
It doesn't bleed into the stone?
No, it'll go right through the stones. And you'll watch it, it'll just spider out.
I've done it, but I find I have to slightly seal the rock first to stop the bleed.
Really? Huh. We have an issue here.
No, I've been using the watercolor the same way.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that you're using an enamel,
Yeah.
The model master
is
must
part
seal
of the
it.
sealing, you're causing a sealing action. In other words, the enamel's different than the water base you've been using. for the rest
Yeah,
of
that
your
could be
stones.
why.
It might be why it's not absorbing, it's sealing it.
Yeah. I feel like George Washington Carver with peanuts. I discovered something by accident. But that's how that works. So I just invented something that we can write about. Darryl, let's do an article.
Mineral spirits is the thinner, also would have that same tendency to seal
Yeah.
out water.
Exactly. All right, I never thought of that. Glad somebody brought it up. I just learned something at my own clinic of why it doesn't soak in. And when I'm done with that, I even come back and touch up some of the stones with the wash, and I'll add that darkened mortar color. Because the reason I like the dark is because this is where mildew and dust runoff and dirt would settle. I don't like the look of new mortar. Just doesn't look good to me.
It's too new.
Yeah, it's too new. So we dry brush a little bit too and come back, and you just play with the wall until you get it to where you like it.
When you're dry brushing, you use vertical strokes on the walls?
It depends on the. It depends. And I know what you mean. It depends on the stone. Like on these corner on the sill stones, I would highlight the edges. You know, I'd get all the paint. We'll go over the dry brushing right now. What the heck? The what?
I said, I want to see that pair of pants.
Don't laugh because there's something else I did that's kind of interesting. The type of brush for dry brushing. Any questions on the stone? I don't want to leave the stones just hanging.
Are you going to cover brick too?
Yes. See?
I just had a question about the wash that's made with the Model Master enamels. Does that have shelf life? Or do you have to mix that in small batches?
I mix that in small batches, and what I buy, I get them at Michael's or wherever. They're little round pallets. They look like little egg cartons. Or you can buy the square ones that have 6 indents. I just mix enough wash to fill those. Yeah, it doesn't have much of a shelf life because, you know, who knows when I'm going to use it again, and that stuff just settles. I don't have good luck with stains lasting very long. I just mix them in small amounts because they harden.
Thinner is the mineral
Yeah, I
spirit?
just use plain old mineral spirits. I don't get fancy and get testers thinner and all that. It's just, I've got a gallon can of mineral spirits in the garage, and that'll last forever. Brickwork.
Dry brushing. We're going to go over dry brushing.
Well, we were just going to touch on brick real quick.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And brick is kind of brick is a personal thing. For me, but some people like the real dark brick that you see on a new building, or I happen to like a particular color of brick that you see in areas of Boston and Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, and they're more of an orangey, they have an orangey tint to them. And how I make that color for that, I don't think it's even on here. I don't even think we have much on brick. But I'll give you my kind of off-the-cuff brick recipe, since we're talking about it. I use a Denver Rio Grande light freight car brown or red, and it's made by Polyscale. But actually, any freight car red will do, because you're going to alter the color greatly. Because what I add to the color are the Bragdon, are these weathering powders that are used for rust. I mean, basically, when you think about it, brick is a rusty color often. And what I like is to add this color, rust, to the brick. I wish this had a name for it, but it doesn't. I add this to the freight car red, and I mix this right into the paint, and I thin it a little bit with water too. You get a kind of a consistency that'll brush well, but it will not go into the cracks, the mortar joints, and fill them. You want to be able to have this spread. And then when that is dry, I'll brush all my bricks this basic freight car red and this with this mixed in it. And you got a basic brick color. And then what I'll do is I'll come in. You ever see how bricks are black? Some of the bricks are black from being fired. And those crummy bricks wouldn't be on the front of a building. You know, an owner of a brand new building wouldn't hear of it. Those bricks are used on the back and the alleys and the burnt bricks. So I like to add some burnt bricks. So I'll take a small brush and I'll mix up a little paste of the soot color Bragdon, and I'll randomly make a few burnt bricks here and there.
With water.
With water. And then I like those really orangey rotting bricks that you see on the corner where a lot of water would settle. And I'll come in with this and mix this in with a little water. And a little of the paint too, you know, because this tends to be a little too orangey. But for those rotted orangey bricks that are crumbling, I like to use this. And I use these colors on that brick wall section, the windowed up section. Jerry.
So, on both the burnt bricks and the orange bricks, you add either soot or the orange rust powder to your paint,
Yeah.
and then mix it with water.
Right. You want to
still
you want to
use the
make
paint
the
as a
brick.
vehicle, sort of.
Yeah, you can use paint, a little water, you know, a little of both.
Okay.
You know, you've got to get it to a consistency that you can work with, and that's not anything that I can really explain. You've got to really feel that out. But it's not difficult. None of these methods are difficult. They really aren't. I don't think I had really planned on talking about brick, but I'm glad you brought it up. Because
How about the mortar for the brick?
mortar, what I use for mortar is I do the same capillary effect for the mortar as I do for the black. What I use is aged concrete mixed in with a little earth thrown in. But I want it light because I want it to show up. So I'll mix a thin wash of that and I'll do the same thing. I'll wet the wall first. It's very important that you wet the wall first. Not saturate it, but just get it wet enough. And you'll know because you're going to experiment before you go any further. You'll touch an area. If it's not right, wipe it off. But I don't do every single mortar joint. I'll do areas, and I'll even come in with the black and do a few mortar joints that just got caked with mildew and dirt. I don't like a totally uniform item. This is just me. Totally uniform, beautiful mortar brick. It just doesn't look right. Any questions about brick?
In my area, which is southwest Ontario, so we have a lot of yellow brick.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
goes, especially back in the late 50s or earlier,
Right,
it gets very black from drain smoke and other things.
right.
I'm looking for a way to simulate that.
Well, I don't know how to do yellow brick, but I did stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night. I'm going to ask David, how would you do yellow brick?
I would have used
The yellow brick. A cream?
No.
I know the color that you're talking about. You could probably... Probably what? Yeah, I'd experiment with the color.
That's what I'm doing.
You know, I thought David might have something. Darryl, you have anything off the top of your head?
DNRGW yellow.
Okay. Denver, Rio Grande.
Cut it a lot.
Cut a, yeah, try it. You know, experiment around. And who's to say? Who's to say exactly what color that brick is up there? You created the color, and that's the color it is. That's another thing. I don't like to get caught up with trying to copy an exact brick color or an exact wood color and you know, start flipping out that it's not going to be exactly right. Because once you start weathering it and once you get under layout lighting, who the heck knows what color it was? I mean, that's another thing too. You want it to look good under your layout lighting and the lighting in which it's going to be displayed. So play around with your colors. It's number one, it's got to look good. If it's an exact replica of something that's outside, it might not look good inside. So play with your colors and get them to where you like them.
A flesh color, dry brush with a flesh color, you get more of that yellowish color.
Yeah, Marilyn Monroe flesh. It's the color. Dave's going to cover that as figure painting tomorrow night. Darryl.
The colors you're using there, these are standards among the hobby.
Yeah.
But within the artist community, there's all kinds of different pigments that are made in powder form,
Yeah.
so you can blend exactly the shade that you want.
Exactly.
Just instead of just trying to stick with the standard
Right.
brand Bragdon.
Well, like I said in the beginning, what I'm giving you tonight is just basics to whet your appetite to where you'll go out and you'll mix your own colors. Artist pigments, you can do oils. I mean, there's some phenomenal stuff in diorama and the art of diorama building that is just, it's canyons deep into where you can go with color. Somebody else had a question. Oh, Pat.
Maybe a mention of wet water, because you've mentioned water several times.
Right.
Unless
You-
you've broken the surface tension, you got a mess.
Exactly. I should know that because I'm a fireman. We use wet water. You can add 2 drops or so. I use a little pump sprayer, little finger trigger sprayer on top. And that's what I use for my spraying. But yeah, to lower the surface tension, add a couple drops of detergent to it. I forget to do it.
If you get a Windex bottle down to where it's only got about a ½ inch in the bottom, fill it up with water, it works beautiful.
Oh, okay. All right, there you go. Good idea. You know, I start running out of water, I'll run and fill it and forget to put soap in it. So I can't even remember the last time I put soap in one of my squirt bottles. So,
Brian?
yeah.
Just one question. On the stone, you use an enamel. On the brick, you're using an acrylic, right? You're using polyscale?
Yeah, I was using the poly scale.
I'm just wondering but it does seal it well enough so that when you come back with your mortar, it still does a capillary?
Yeah, I haven't had any problem with it. I just happen to mention the acrylic there because I use what I have, you know, and I just happen to have the freight car colors in polyscale, so that's what I was using. Had I had them in enamel, I might have used them, you know. So, but you know, if you want to use enamels, that's fine. It's up to the individual, as long as the color is right, and the color choice is yours.
With mineral spirits.
Yeah, cut it with mineral spirits. Yeah. Did you have a question? All right, we'll talk about dry brushing. Any questions on stone or brick before we go on? Dave?
I'll save it for later.
Save it for later. Dry brushing. The art of dry brushing. This is often difficult for some people. It's not really. I use These are shader brushes or flat brushes, they're called. I like number 6s, I like number 4s, and these are available in your craft stores, Michael's or wherever. This particular brand I'm using these days is made by American Painter, and it has a synthetic. I'm really enjoying using the synthetic brushes for dry brushing. Number one, if you use a really expensive brush for dry brushing, you're going to destroy these brushes anyway. And what I use the dry brush for, I'll pass this little tank around, but a lot of the colors on this little water tank casting, this is a casting, it's hollow in the bottom, but a lot of the colors that are on here were dry brushed on. I did a base coat of tarnished black and then came along with some rust. I would dip the brush in rust color, polyscale rust, and just dab it on there. And then come in with some powder, some of the Bragdon powders, and just, dab it into the damp paint, and it sticks. And then when it starts to dry, then I feather it out. And then when we'll talk about that too, but we'll begin with the dry brushing. You want to dip your brush just the very, very last third of the bristles into the cap. I use the paint cap. Does anybody else do that? I just shake the paint and I use what's in the cap. I dab it in the cap. On a paper towel, I get as much of the paint off as I possibly can. And what I do, and I don't know I know other people do this, I don't deny it, is I'll test it on my hand. And if it doesn't fill the cracks in on my hand, it's ready to go. Darryl, you do that?
No.
Well, you will now. So that's what I do. And then you're ready to dry brush. And what you want to do is you just want to, these rivets on this tank here, you just want to just gently go over those rivets to where they're starting to pop out and you can see them. Can you see those, Steve? Can you see them now? See them now? So you just want the rivets to just pop out. And then what I'll do too is I'll just on the corner, I'll just highlight that corner a little bit and the edges and the rivet detail on the top. And then I'll come in even with a little gray, just highlight an area of the raised texture on the tank. And you just slowly build up your color by dry brushing. That's what I do. I dry brush, add a little of the Bragdon chalk powder. It's not actually chalk. What is it actually?
Powdered pigment.
Powdered pigments.
Yeah.
But it supposedly has a very slight adhesive in it.
It has
I
an
think it's
adhesive in
just-
it. But I
That's what
just
these
slowly
are.
build up my colors that way. I dry brushing up the colors. And then when I'm all done, I do the actual dry brushing. And the colors I like for dry brushing are basically light grays. Sometimes I'll use antique white or aged white. Not too often do I use just plain white. I like to have things toned down and not have it bite you so much. So,
Are those acrylics again or no?
yeah, oh yeah, good point. Acrylics, rather than enamels, dry brush, they have better dry brushing characteristics than the enamels. The enamel pigment is super fine, whereas in the acrylics it's a little more gooey and really lays down well, I have found. You agree with that, David?
Yes, sir.
Darn right you do.
Do you sometimes dry brush a lighter color down to give an effect of sunlight shining on something. I've read that somewhere, like on stone or castings of some sort.
Well, that, when I was talking about highlighting the corners,
That would be for that.
that would be good. Like the, like on this truck, Jerry. You know, where the sun would bounce off the fender, and the edges here, or the top of the radiator cap. This entire truck was dry brushed, and it's just color on top of color, just layering the color up. It's I don't want to say it's an advanced technique, but it is kind of an advanced technique that you just kind of practice and
There was no base color to start?
yeah, this was a pretty much dry brushed on cream color. I just thought the truck might look good cream, so I painted it cream, and then gave it washes of India ink and alcohol and washes. I make washes up using these along mixed in with the alcohol, because these will settle down into the cracks, and you want to highlight your cracks because it makes everything else stand out.
That's what you used on the wood, you get, the dark texture inside on the wood side and what have you.
Yeah, that was I used the Bragdon. Is that what you're referring to?
Alcohol and dragon stuff.
Actually, I use mineral spirits with the Bragdon. I wash it in with that. I guess you probably could use water, but the only reason I don't use water is because it would tend to shrink the
Talking about alcohol.
alcohol. Yeah, if you're using 91 maybe, but I just have had such good luck just using mineral spirits because I know it's not going to shrink the grain.
Doesn't it expand?
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing the mineral spirits because I've always been afraid of shrinking the grain that I work my tail off to get in with the wire brush, and I don't want it to watch it disappear. Realistic roofs. Is dry brushing kind of clear to you? I mean, any questions on dry brushing? Or I know I could probably I could devote a whole evening to laying color on top of color and shading and washes. I mean, that's probably a whole night in itself doing that.
One quick question.
Yeah.
When you're using these acrylics for the dry brush, what kind of time needs to elapse before you can dry brush on the next color that you're feeling like?
You can play with that and that's a good question, because I like to blend colors. Some colors will dry fairly quickly, and you can dry brush color on top of color. And actually, you kind of want to do that. You kind of want to blend your colors. You don't want one to jump out over the other. It's a blending, and it's hard to explain. Is it clear, or am I?
Are you working light to dark,
Yeah.
or dark to light, or any particular?
It depends on if you have a light base like that truck, you're going to go from light up to dark and then back down again. You're gonna move around with the colors until you get it to where you want it, and that takes a little experimentation, and you're creating methods. Sometimes you're creating methods as you're going along, and if you do it enough and you keep practicing, all of a sudden you develop your own little methods, and you expand other methods that you've learned about or read about. There's no exact way of doing it.
On this tank, is the Brighton top and this weathering?
Yeah, that was first done with a coat of tarnished black. I let that dry overnight, And then I started just dabbing on rust and roof brown and dabbing in the chalks until it got the effect that I liked. And I got, with using the Bragdon chalks, we'll call them chalks, it gives you some texture. And once you start dry brushing, that texture starts to show up. And you can add chalks. If you don't like what you have, you can even wet it and wipe some of it away and start over. That's what's good about working with the acrylic, I have found. Realistic roofs. For tar paper, I use Kleenex Continental bathroom tissue. And the reason I like that is because it has a raised kind of texture to it. It just looks like bubbled up tar paper for me. And what I do to make my tar paper, depending on what scale you're modeling in, like I usually make it 3 scale feet wide. And I believe it or not, I'll just take a square tissue, bathroom tissue, and just cut it approximate. I mean, no one is going to get down on your roof with their scale and measure your tar paper. I just get it approximate. It looks good. And some I'll cut less wide for smaller roofs. Because if you used a 3 scale foot sheet on a small shed, you wouldn't have much character to your roof. So I cut them as thin as possible so I have as many joints as possible to make the roof look busy. I like to make roofs look busy because it's the first thing you're going to see when you look at a model. So it's got to look, you want it to look good, you want it to look interesting. Anyway, I'll cut my bathroom tissue, Kleenex Continental, to the approximate width. And length varies. For a short run roof, I'll cut them maybe 4 scale feet wide, little squares of it, and use those. Or for long runs, I'll make those about 15 feet long and then have a vertical joint. But what I do is I mix up 50-50 white glue and water. Plain Elmer's white glue and water. And I mix that up in a bicycling water bottle because it's got a pop cap, and I can shake this stuff up and just pour it in a little container. And what I add to that, once I mix up the 50-50 white glue and water, I'll pour some of that into a small container, and then I'll take polyscale tarnished black, it's the acrylic, and I'll add that, I'll add a brush load of that, or a couple brush loads of that until it starts to turn that color. So you've got this 50-50 white glue and water, and you're adding the black, tarnished black to it. And then I'll just add maybe a couple drops of roof brown and maybe a drop of gray. But we'll get into the coloring of that later. But what I'll do is I'll put a corner of the tissue on the roof, and I'll have a brush load of that, and you have to carefully, because it's tissue, you have to carefully lay the tissue down and then gently dab it with the brush load of paint. And you'll see it capillary out. And then you gently, with your finger, touch it down along the roof edge and let it overhang a little bit, because you're going to come back after it's dry and cut it with a single edge razor or an X-Acto knife. I like single edge razors. But you do your runs with that 15 feet and then start another, overlap your joints until you get to the end, and then you come up to your second row and run that maybe 10 feet, make it 5 feet shorter from the other joint. That way you stagger your joints and you add some character and some busy to your roof. You don't want long, boring runs of tar paper. So do those all the way up until you get to the peak. Of course, stop at the peak. And then while it's still a little damp, I come in with some gray, wherever the driftwood went. I'll make up thin washes of gray, roof brown, a little bit of earth, and just multi-color these washes to where it looks like dust and rust runoff from vent pipes. And I'll do those while this is all still damp. I'll let that dry overnight, and when you come back the next day, that toilet paper, bathroom tissue, will be as hard as a rock. And all those little raised ridges that you have are all ready to be dry brushed. They're screaming to be dry brushed, because this is what's going to add the character to your roof. I don't want to pass this model around because it's heavy and it's unwieldy, but you can look at it. But I'll take earth and light gray, rust, and I'll dry brush all these raised little edges, and which gives your roof a lot of depth, a lot more character, and just general better appearance. I'll even tear, before this is dry, I noticed I have some exposed areas. If you have boards underneath, let's say you want to do some exposed boards, but you don't want to board your whole roof. You just do a section of boards, like we did earlier. We have some aged boards, and lay those in a little area. And lay your tar paper around it. You know, when you get up to it, cut it there and then begin again. But build the tar paper up around these boards, because the boards are thick. And because when the tar paper dries, you can see the ends of the boards under there. So you want to gradually fade your tar paper thickness in to where it looks like the whole entire roof is boarded, but it's really not. You fool all your friends. Think you did a board-on-board roof. But, so that's a little trick to add more character. Wherever you want to add roof vents, you can add them now. You can drill a hole with your X-Acto knife and stick a vent in, and then do rust runs down from that. There's all kinds of things you can do with roofs. You can add, whenever I do a metal roof, and we'll get into the metal roof thing in a bit, I'll always save a few panels left over. You can do a patch job. You can do a patch job on your roof with some metal panels and some more tar paper and a couple of loose boards. You don't want to make the roof so busy that it takes away, but you want to add character to it because you're going to be looking at it. It's the first thing you're going to see, pretty much. Now, any questions on tar paper roofs? That's just one of my methods. I've used newspaper, I've used all kinds of things for tar paper. But that's just one that's tar paper du jour. You know.
How do you get the ripple effect?
The ripple effect, the Kleenex Continental bathroom tissue has a raised kind of texture to it already. It's just not a flat bathroom tissue. It's got like a bubbly kind of look to it. Let's see, when you go to the grocery store, pick up don't squeeze it. Or is it Charmin you don't squeeze? Pick up a package of it and look at the texture of it. Look at all the toilet paper on that aisle and see what you like for your roof. Just don't get anything with an S on it, or a design.
Flowers or...
Yeah, you don't want family crests on the roof. So, but that's why I like Kleenex Continental. I know a couple other buddies of mine are using it now. This is a friend of ours, Nick Ogden in England. This friend of ours came over from England and he said, "Brian, I've got to have a roll of that Kleenex Continental." He went back to England with a suitcase full of toilet paper. I can imagine when he went through customs. Anyway, that's the Kleenex Continental story. But newspaper works good. John Addison uses newspaper exclusively, doesn't he, Dave? Yeah, I think he just sprays it with any old... Pardon?
He's tried your method. You pulled it in, he's tried your method.
Oh, he's doing the toilet paper method. So that's that method. But people use copy. I've used copy paper. I've used all kinds of things for tar paper. But the Kleenex is my, like I said, roof du jour.
You were gonna tell us how you pull those edges up, though. I think that's where we were going here.
Yeah, glad somebody's here to remind me. You can just take the tip of an X-Acto knife. I'm glad you brought it up. You can roll back some edges while they're still damp and just leave them, just like do a little loop on them, and like the wind blew it. And you can tear them and put a loop in it. You know, make them interesting. And your vertical joints, you can take your like a number 11 blade, X-Acto blade, and just gently pry up the edge while it's drying. You want to do that a couple hours into its drying time. Go have lunch or whatever, if you're married. And do something. Then come back and lift up your edges.
Nice model.
Thanks, Jerry.
Did you do that?
I didn't do that model. I had Dave Ravella build it for me.
Okay.
No, that's mine.
Is that, you said that was one, excuse me, that you used the cardboard and the paper?
Yeah, that's a cardboard model. That's what I call it. No, that's a wood model, but that has for building that little freight depot.
Yeah,
this is the cardboard I use. This piece right here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that's solid.
Yeah. Well, what makes it solid
Brace it.
is all the wood. The wood is going to beef it up.
That's a nice.
Plus, you brace it from behind, vertically and horizontally. But for all intents and purposes, this thing was just a piece of cardboard when it went from this to this. Terry.
Whose shingles are on there?
These are my shingles. Do you want to talk about the shingles?
Sure.
Okay. Did you all happen to notice the shingles?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, you hurt.
Yeah. Now the shingles, oh man, John's going to be here in a few minutes. We have like 5 minutes.
Keep away. Come on.
The shingles I get not from Sierra West scale models, not from Sierra West. I get them from Sierra scale models. And as a matter of fact, who has some good shingle material in there now is Jerry Cromwell over at Mount Albert, Scale Lumber. I get the Sierra scale shingle material, and you can just do a web search and find them. I'm sorry I didn't put the website on here, but I wasn't going to get into the whole shingle method tonight. All these shingles are individual pieces, and I cut them to basically to scale. I cut them to eye. Some of these, the old cedar shakes way back when, could be as much as a foot wide, even 16 inches wide, the old hand splits. But I like to keep them about 10 scale inches, just under a foot. And that's easy to mark if you're using your scale. And I cut them, I almost make it look like a hula skirt, because I slice the sheets of it, foot wide, foot wide, foot wide, foot wide. And then, to make it look jaggedy, I don't cut these perfect with a straight edge and an X-Acto knife. I just take a scissor and I just go to cut. I just cut them to where they look right. And which right would be about an 18-inch shingle long by about 10 wide. That'd be an old cedar shake. Some of them are thinner, some of them are wider, And then, what I do, I don't even draw lines to lay these things down. After I lay my first course, then I just eyeball about, maybe a foot to the weather, meaning a foot of it exposed. And I glue them down with tight bond, waterproof, wood glue, and I use that because you're going to add multiple washes to this, and you don't want your shingles to pry. You don't want your shingles to come loose. You want something that's really going to hold them down, bulletproof. I hit them with 2 washes of India ink and alcohol to get the basic gray color. Then I take a 1-ounce paint jar, the size of polyester. What are these? How many ounces is this? A half ounce? These are half ounce. I use an ounce jar, and I'll fill it 2/3 of the way up with, is that John? 2/3 of the way up with mineral spirits. Then I add I add Flow-Quill grime, just to where it turns it grime color. I don't measure anything. And then I'll add Flow-Quill, because we're working with mineral spirits here. Flow-Quill Roof Brown. So you got this gray browny looking stain. And once the India ink is dry, then I stain all these shingles with that color. And I'll do that, I think I usually give them 2 coats of that stain. When that's dry, I come back and I dry brush with mud and earth. My 2 favorite dry brush colors. Mud and earth, and then when those are about near dry, then I come in and I highlight all the shingle edges with a medium gray and a light gray. And then I'll add ink washes, periodically, down from the chimney, of course, with rust and just your runs, your water runs don't have to start at the peak. They can start anywhere. If you look at a real shake roof, you'll see where they're just random. Pick a spot, give yourself a line.
Where do you lay those shakes against?
The cedar shakes,
Yeah, do you have a,
Sierra scale models.
no, what I'm saying is, where do you lay them against? Do you have a piece of the cardboard under there? And lay them
Cardboard. It's my thing.
How do you keep
Cardboard.
How do you keep the cardboard thickness from showing at the edge?
against? Yeah.
Well, what you got to do is you have to put your carpentry skills to work and make yourself a fascia board. And just, to get your angle on your fascia board, hold it up with a scissor and eyeball and cut it and then tack it on. Done. Fascia board
How do
applied.
you handle the bottom edge, the runoff edge?
This?
Overlap.
Overlap with the phony board pieces underneath?
Oh, the rafters?
Yeah.
Cardboard.
The cardboard, you're hiding the cardboard down there too,
Oh, this. Oh, under here.
Yeah.
Oh, I just laid in some
but, yeah.
scrap wood. You could go horizontally or you could go vertical. It's up to you. And you could add a couple other boards in there for interest. I just was too lazy to apply them.
You draw some lines under it to represent.
Yeah, you do draw lines on there to represent it.
Card paper overlap a little bit.
And then cut your rafter tails. And you want to mark where those are going to go, whether the 24 inches on center or some are 16.
When the shingles go on the roof, your first course is usually double course too.
Yeah, usually on a real roof they are, but I don't do that here because I thought of that and it looked too thick. It's just,
Yeah.
too thick.
You want something like that, so maybe something like the new Paper Creek stuff would give you a nice first course to hide under there and then just overlap it a little bit.
You could do that. Paper Creek's nice stuff. Paper Creek's real nice. It fooled me when I first saw Paper Creek out in Denver. That's when I first saw it. You saw it too, Darryl? We saw it out in Denver. I was blown away by it. We have Darryl with us tonight. Darryl's a good friend. Darryl also has weathering techniques. I'm not here to plug this. I have this, and so we all learn from each other. And this has excellent stuff on it, on peeling paint and rust. Darryl's got some really great techniques for rust. So we all learn from each other. And when I'm done here, I'm going to see Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben inside has some great rust stuff, and it's neat.
You have time to do the corrugated real fast?
The corrugated, we'll do the corrugated real quick, because John's going to be here, I guess, in 15. No, that's for corrugated metal roofs. My preferred method is the Radio Shack etchant. Are you all familiar with that, pretty much? And for O scale, I work O scale, HO scale, S scale. I use 2 dishes, one that has clear water in it and one that's going to have your etching in it. And I fill the one dish up, they're just small glass dishes, you want to use glass. And I fill the first one up with about that much etching, and then the second one I fill all the way up with water. Not, all the way, but close to the top. First I cut my roof panels to size. Now I know that they say you should use an X-Acto knife and cut the panels, real neatly and gently. I cut mine with an old scissor to approximately 3 feet wide and 4 to 6 feet long. And I get those all cut to size how many I need, and I'll start by dipping just one of the panels into the etchant to get the etchant kind of moving. And what the etchant does is it's basically an acid, and it's used for etching circuit boards. And it'll take these little rust panels, and anybody not familiar with these? I got a few of them, you can pass them around. Yeah, I'll drop one of these in, and you got to poke it down to the bottom because they like to float. And then it'll come to the top, and all the etchant will bead off it, and then you got to poke it back down again, and you got to play around until all of a sudden it starts to fizzle. The etchant is starting to work, and that piece is gone because you didn't get it out in time. We've all done that. Timing. John, we're almost done. So do your panels. I'm like kind of got to get out of here for John, but that's what I like to use, and I still touch those up with.
Put the ridges in it?
Oh no, I buy them like that. Yeah.
That's the camera.
There are those diehards that make their own corrugated metal roofs out there, but I'm not one of them. You can buy this material from CC Crow. He has the
Builders and scale.
Builders and Scale now. He's carrying the Builders and Scale line of metal roofing.
Campbell still makes them too.
Campbell makes them for HO scale. Hey, one last little thing. This art emboss foil. This is available in Michael's or the other craft stores. And if you have a Grant Line S scale 55-gallon drum or an O scale 55-gallon drum or even HO scale, you can cut little pieces of this foil. Steve, which hand? And what you do, you can use this as your master. And if you have a fingernail, you got a drum. And you just run your fingernail around that drum. I'm doing this real stupid fast, but yeah, you got to stop chewing your fingernails, Jerry, so you can make drums. But you basically now have a drum.
What is this supposed to call?
It's art embossing foil. And what you can do is you can turn that 55-gallon drum into a 30-gallon drum if you want. Make a little shop waste container. You can take loops of brass wire and make little handles. That's what I did on the station, the freight house. This is one of those foil drums. I just added a couple of handles to it.
What do you call that?
It's art embossing foil.
Michael.
Art.
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 ARC.
Yeah, we're not embossing arcs. It's art embossing foil. Yeah, but that stuff's handy for a zillion different things. Scrap laying around, bands for water tanks, little trash cans with handles. You can poke holes in it. They look great with holes poked in them. Burn barrels, poke a bunch of holes on the bottom. mount it up on blocks, you got a burn barrel. And there's all kinds of little neat little projects you can do with it. It's great stuff. And I guess that's about all we have time for. I could talk for hours on this.
Good, I got one last question.
Oh, Jerry has a question.
This has bothered me. How do you do wood?
Jerry, I would like you to address the audience with your question, Jerry.
Plaster wood.
Plaster wood.
You know the castings like Thomas York where he has a wood door or a wood building. How do you make that look like wood?
Let's get Lou Ulian on the phone because he's got the method.
Okay.
Actually, I was just talking to him last week about that because he's got some beautiful York wooden, which are plaster.
Right.
And he just used he used driftwood. He used a thin wash of, what's the dark?
Walnut?
Walnut. He used, and a tiny bit of cherry. And his plaster wood buildings look like real wood. Fooled me. Fooled John. John Addison, who just poked his head in here a minute ago. I said to John, John, you got to see this building. He said, what building? I said, that building right there. I said, what do you think? He said, that's gorgeous. I said, that's plaster. He said, no way. I said, yes, it's plaster.
I wonder if he seals it first.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Try it on the back and seal a small part and see what happens.
Yeah, try the back. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you show that to anybody, I'll kill you.
That's a threat. You better watch out for the lawsuit.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. I enjoyed it.
Yep.
That's so good.
Oh. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're the one who had.